Emily Hart never imagined her Friday evening would change everything. The Virginia air carried a crisp bite of autumn, the kind that left a faint chill across the skin, but smelled of fallen leaves and bonfire smoke. She had just completed a grueling 12-hour shift at the base clinic, where her hands had touched wounds, her voice had steadied frightened soldiers, and her patience had stretched thin, yet never broken. Nursing was never easy, but Emily loved the work. It connected her to people in their most vulnerable moments, reminding her why she had chosen this path. The clinic lights dimmed behind her as she stepped into the night. A nearly empty parking lot stretched ahead, the dull glow of overhead lamps painting silver pools on the asphalt. Emily slung her bag over her shoulder, eager to get home, shower, and curl up with the book she'd been reading for weeks in stolen moments. She walked quickly, her shoes clicking softly, the sound echoing across the lot. Then it happened. A sound too faint for most ears, yet sharp enough to stop her mid-stride. At first it blended with the night, the rustle of leaves, a distant engine, the hum of a fluorescent light. But it wasn't mechanical or natural. It was human. A low groan, strained and broken. Emily froze, head tilted, listening. Another groan. A desperate cry, weak but undeniably real. Her training kicked in. Without hesitation, she dropped her bag onto the pavement and followed the sound toward the shadowy edge of the lot. Beyond a row of supply trucks, the dim light faltered, leaving patches of darkness where anything could hide. The cries grew louder as she moved closer, her heart quickening, her hands already searching her pockets for the small first aid kit she habitually carried. "Hello?" She called softly, her voice firm but cautious. "I'm a nurse. I can help." Silence answered first, then a ragged cough. Emily rounded the truck and gasped. Slumped against the wall was a Marine in fatigues, his uniform torn and dark with blood. His face was pale, sweat dripping down his temples. One hand pressed to his abdomen, trembling from the effort, while his legs sprawled uselessly beneath. Him! Oh my God! Emily dropped to her knees beside him, the cold concrete biting through her scrubs. "Stay with me. You're going to be okay." The Marine's lips moved, but the words were barely a whisper. She leaned close, catching fragments. "Can't move. Hurts." "Don't talk," she instructed, her hands already working. She pressed her kit against the wound, ripping gauze and applying pressure. Blood seeped fast, hot and sticky against her palms. Her stomach twisted, but she pushed the feeling down. Nurses didn't have the luxury of panic. Her free hand groped for her phone. She needed backup, an ambulance, anything. But just as she unlocked the screen, a movement flickered in her peripheral vision. She froze. From the shadows between two trucks, a figure emerged. At first, it looked like another Marine, broad shoulders, purposeful stride. Relief nearly washed through her, but it evaporated in an instant. The man's posture wasn't right. His gait was too deliberate, too quiet. Then the faint glint caught the light a knife, long and sharp, dangling loosely from his hand. Emily's breath hitched. Instinct screamed at her to run. But the Marine beside her lay helpless, bleeding, unable to defend himself. If she fled, he was finished. Her choice crystallized in a heartbeat. She shifted, crouching lower over the Marine, shielding as much of his body as possible with her own. Her pulse hammered in her ears, drowning out thought. The man stepped closer, the knife reflecting the dim yellow light. His face was shadowed, but she could see enough cold eyes, tight jaw, intent written in every line. This was no random passerby. This was an attack. "Stay behind me," she whispered to the Marine, though she knew he couldn't move even if he wanted to. Emily's mind raced. She thought of the soldiers she'd treated men, and women who faced fire, shrapnel, and uncertainty daily. She thought of their stories of bravery and sacrifice. Wasn't this her moment now? She wasn't armed, wasn't trained for combat, but she had something else. Resolve. The attacker lunged. Time slowed. Emily caught the downward arc of steel. Every detail burned into memory. The first stab sliced across her forearm as she raised it instinctively, searing pain shooting through her body. Her cry was sharp but brief, swallowed by the chaos. Still, she didn't move away. She bent lower over the Marine, her back an unyielding barrier. The knife came again, plunging into her ribs. White-hot agony spread, stealing her breath. Her vision spotted, but she refused to collapse. Another strike tore at her side, the force rattling through her bones. 7 times the blade found her. 7 times she felt her body tear, her strength threatened to abandon her. Yet through it all, she stayed in place, her arms wrapped around the Marine, as if sheer will could shield him from death. Her white coat, once a symbol of healing, turned crimson. Blood dripped steadily, soaking the ground beneath her knees. The attacker pulled back, preparing for another strike. Emily's grip tightened on the Marine. Her voice, weak but defiant, whispered near his ear, "You'll live. I won't let him take you." Then, salvation. Shouts erupted at the far end of the lot. Heavy boots thundered against pavement. Flashlights cut through the shadows. The attacker froze, knife still raised. Military police stormed forward, weapons drawn, voices commanding. "Drop it," one shouted. "Now." For the first time, the attacker hesitated. His eyes darted from Emily to the incoming guards. In that fleeting pause, Emily felt her body give way. The strength drained from her muscles, her arms slipping, her head drooping toward the Marine's chest. She heard the clatter of metal hitting concrete, the sound of men wrestling, someone cursing. But it all blurred together. Her vision tunneled. All she could see was the Marine's pale face beneath her, his chest still rising faintly. He was alive. That was enough. Darkness closed in, but Emily clung to one final thought. If this was the end for her, at least she hadn't run. She had chosen to stand, to protect, to be the barrier between life and death. And as her eyes fluttered shut, she whispered a silent prayer, not for herself, but for the man she'd sworn, in that terrible moment, to keep breathing. Emily's consciousness flickered like a dying candle flame, but the world had not yet let her go. The pain was raw, unbearable, clawing through every nerve as if fire had been poured beneath her skin. Her breaths came in ragged gasps, shallow and broken, but she refused to collapse completely. The Marine beneath her shifted weakly, groaning, his voice nearly lost in the night. "You're safe," she whispered hoarsely, though her lips trembled. "I've got you." The words were as much for herself as for him. Her body screamed in agony, her vision blurred, yet her will anchored her to the ground. The attacker, halted for a moment by the approaching shouts, snarled in frustration. He had not expected interference, had not expected his prey to resist with such reckless determination. In his mind, this woman should have fallen after the first blow. Yet, she persisted, shielding the Marine with her body, as though her thin frame could rival steel. Rage twisted across his face. He stepped forward again, knife clenched tight. The MPs were closing in fast, but he had seconds to finish what he had started. Emily saw the blade rise once more, moonlight catching the steel. Her stomach clenched with dread, but she did not move away. She braced herself, pressing her shoulder harder against the Marine's chest. If the knife came again, it would pierce her first. She thought briefly of her parents, of unfinished dreams, of mornings she had taken for granted. But the fear dissolved quickly, replaced by a strange calm. She had chosen this. She had chosen him over herself. The blade began to fall, and then a deafening command shattered the night. Drop IT. Drop the weapon now. Flashlights blinded the attacker, beams slicing through the darkness. Heavy boots struck the pavement in rhythm, weapons aimed and steady. The MPs were closer now, voices booming like thunder. For a split second, time froze. The attacker hesitated, the knife suspended midair. His jaw tightened as his eyes darted between Emily and the oncoming soldiers. Emily, her strength nearly gone, whispered again to the Marine, "Hold on." Her blood dripped steadily, warm against his fatigues, her body trembling with every shallow breath. Then came the metallic clang. The knife fell, skittering across concrete. In an instant, 2 MPs lunged, tackling the man to the ground. Shouts, curses, and the crackle of a radio filled the air as handcuffs clicked into place. Relief should have come. But Emily felt none. Her body, having held out as long as it could, began to crumble. Her arms trembled, no longer able to support her weight. She slumped against the Marine, her head resting near his shoulder. The world tilted, spinning, pulling her toward unconsciousness. "Stay with me," one medic shouted, dropping to her side. Another pair rushed to the Marine. 2 down, multiple stab wounds. "We need stretchers now." Emily tried to respond, to tell them where the worst of her wounds were, but her throat was dry, her tongue heavy. Only a faint groan escaped. She wanted to say, "Take him first, save him first," but the words never formed. Hands pressed firmly against her abdomen, stemming the tide of blood. Bandages wrapped around her arm in quick motions. An oxygen mask slipped over her face, cool air filling her lungs. Voices blurred together. Pulse weak, BP dropping, we're losing her. Darkness swelled at the edges of her sight, but she clung desperately to one thought. He's alive. That's all that matters. The Marine, Corporal James Miller, fought to lift his head, though every movement was agony. Through fading vision he saw Emily, pale and broken, still shielding him even now. "She saved me," he croaked, voice rasping, his words repeated like a mantra, even as medics pushed him back down, securing 4 lines and tightening tourniquets. Within minutes, stretchers arrived. Emily and Miller were lifted carefully, medics running alongside as they were rushed toward the waiting ambulances. Sirens wailed to life, piercing the night. Inside the ambulance, Emily's condition worsened. Her heart fluttered dangerously, monitors beeping in chaotic rhythm. Paramedics shouted over one another, starting fluids, adjusting oxygen, cutting away the blood-soaked fabric of her coat. One pressed firmly on her ribs. Another held her arm steady while stitching a temporary closure. Her mind drifted in and out, images flashing like shards of glass. The Marine's face, the gleam of the knife, her parents' living room, warm and safe. Then nothing but pain. Still, deep inside, she refused to surrender. Every beat of her heart felt like a battle, but she clung to life with the same stubbornness she had clung to the Marine. At the base hospital, the emergency ward erupted into motion as the 2 stretchers arrived. Doctors shouted orders, nurses darted back and forth. Priority 1, massive blood loss, multiple stab wounds. Get her into surgery now. Emily's eyes flickered, opened briefly as bright lights blinded her. Masked faces leaned close, speaking words she couldn't follow. She wanted to ask about the Marine, to be sure he was safe. But a sedative coursed through her veins, pulling her under. The last thing she felt was a hand squeezing hers, a stranger's, firm and steady, and a voice murmuring, "You're not done yet. Stay with us." Hours passed in a blur of scalpel and suture, blood transfusions, and frantic repair. The surgeons fought tirelessly, closing wound after wound, repairing torn tissue, stopping the bleeding. Her body was broken, but her will showed. And every heartbeat that refused to quit. Meanwhile, in the ward next door, Corporal Miller stabilized under careful hands. His wound was severe, but he clung to consciousness long enough to tell anyone who would listen. She saved me. She wouldn't move. She took it all. His words spread quickly through the hospital staff, carried from one nurse to another, from medics to commanders. By dawn, Emily remained alive, though her condition was critical. Machines beeped steadily, tubes and wires crisscrossing her fragile frame. The night had left her scarred and weak, but she had survived. And outside her room, whispers grew. Soldiers spoke in hushed tones about the nurse who had faced the knife with nothing but courage. Some called her reckless, others called her selfless. But all agreed on one thing. She had proven that courage was not limited to those in uniform. The first light of dawn filtered through the hospital windows, faint and fragile, as though the sun itself hesitated to disturb the heavy silence of the recovery ward. Machines beeped steadily in the background, rhythmic and cold, while the faint scent of antiseptic clung to the air. Emily Hart lay motionless in her bed, tubes weaving across her fragile frame, bandages layered thick across her torso and arms. The night's battle had left her body carved with wounds, each stitched with desperate precision. She had survived surgery. Barely. Dr. Ruiz, the attending surgeon, stepped quietly into the room with his team. His face bore the lines of exhaustion. After hours of grueling work, yet his eyes softened as he regarded her. "She's a fighter," he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. Most would not have made it through. A nurse adjusted the 4-line, checking vitals with quick efficiency. "BP holding steady," she reported, relief in her tone. "But she's not out of danger. We need to monitor closely for infection, internal bleeding." "I know," Ruiz interrupted gently, his gaze still fixed on Emily. "But if willpower counts for anything, this woman isn't leaving us tonight." In the ward next door, Corporal James Miller stirred awake. His abdomen was heavily bandaged, the pain sharp and insistent, but his mind was clear enough to remember the night before. He could still see Emily's face, pale and determined, as she shielded him from the blade. The image haunted him, the flash of steel, the sound of her cries, the feel of her collapsing against him. When a nurse entered to check on him, James rasped out his first words since surgery. "Where is she?" The nurse paused, startled. "She's alive." Critical, but alive. James let out a shaky breath, tears welling unbidden in his eyes. "She saved me. She took every hit, 7 times. She didn't move. She wouldn't let him touch me." His voice cracked. "You need to tell them. Everyone. She's the reason I'm here." The nurse, moved by the intensity in his voice, squeezed his hand reassuringly. "I'll make sure they know." And so the story began to spread. By mid-morning, whispers circulated throughout the hospital. Orderlies repeated what they'd heard from Miller. Surgeons murmured the tale in passing, marveling at the courage of a civilian nurse who had risked everything for one soldier. The details blurred with retelling, but the essence remained. Emily Hart had thrown herself between a Marine and certain death, refusing to yield even as the knife tore into her. Outside her room, her parents arrived, their faces etched with fear and exhaustion. Mrs. Hart clutched her husband's arm, tears glistening as she saw her daughter through the glass. Emily looked impossibly small beneath the tangle of tubes and wires. "She's so pale," her mother whispered. "So fragile." Mr. Hart's jaw tightened, his voice thick with emotion. "She's alive. That's what matters." She fought through the night. She fight through this. A nurse approached gently. You can sit with her, but please keep it quiet. She needs rest. They entered, moving slowly, as though afraid to disturb her fragile grip on life. Mrs. Hart reached for Emily's hand, carefully avoiding the foreline, and whispered through tears, We're here, sweetheart. You're not alone. Emily didn't stir, but a faint flicker in her eyelids gave them hope. Meanwhile, in the Marine ward, Miller continued to speak of her bravery. Every visitor who entered his room heard the same words. She saved me. He repeated them with a conviction that burned into the memory of everyone who listened. Other Marines, curious about the commotion, stopped by to see him. Each time, Miller told the story in painstaking detail, the cries in the night, the sudden attack, the way Emily shielded him with nothing but her body. You don't understand, he told a sergeant who came to check in. She could have run. Anyone else would have run. But she stayed. She took every blow meant for me. His eyes shone with emotion. She's one of us now, whether she knows it or not. The sergeant, hardened by years of service, nodded solemnly. That kind of courage? We don't forget that. By afternoon, word had reached the commanding officers. In the mess hall, Marines spoke in hushed, reverent tones. The story carried through hallways, into barracks, across the entire base. Some questioned the details. 7 stab wounds seemed almost impossible to survive, but each version only deepened their respect. Back in the recovery ward, Emily drifted in and out of consciousness. Flashes of memory tormented her. The gleam of the knife, the sting of each wound, the Marine's pale face beneath her. Sometimes she surfaced enough to hear voices around her, fragments of conversations that slipped away too quickly to grasp. Alive because of her bravery beyond reason. The nurse who wouldn't back down. She tried to speak, but her throat was raw, her voice no more than a whisper. A nurse leaned close. Don't strain yourself. Rest. You're safe now. Safe. The word felt foreign. Her body ached with every breath, every pulse of blood reminding her of the night. But in her heart, she knew she had done what was right. As evening approached, a quiet reverence settled outside her door. Nurses paused as they passed, peeking in with silent respect. Marines lingered in the hallway, reluctant to intrude but unwilling to leave. They saw her not just as a nurse, but as a sister in arms, someone who had bled for one of their own. Dr. Ruiz, exhausted but reflective, spoke to the gathered group. She's not out of danger, but she has a chance, and she deserves every ounce of support we can give. The Marines nodded in agreement. They understood sacrifice. They understood what it meant to stand in the line of fire. And now they understood Emily Hart. In his hospital bed, Corporal Miller stared at the ceiling, replaying the night in his mind. He remembered her voice calm, steady, defiant, even as she bled. He vowed silently that if she lived, he would never let her sacrifice be forgotten. And as the base settled into the quiet hum of night, Emily's story continued to spread, carried from voice to voice, like a spark catching flame. By the next morning, it would reach far beyond the walls of the hospital. But for now, in the dim light of the recovery ward, Emily lay surrounded by whispers of gratitude and awe, her act of courage becoming legend before her eyes had even fully opened. The sterile glow of hospital lights stretched across the corridors, their hum blending with the steady rhythm of machines. Hours after her surgery, Emily Hart remained in critical condition, her body still fragile from the ordeal. The monitors at her bedside painted a story of survival in flickering green lines and faint beeps. Each one reminded the staff how close she had come to death. Dr. Ruiz entered the room once more, exhaustion etched into his features. He had worked with countless patient soldiers with shrapnel wounds, civilians broken by accidents, But something about Emily weighed heavier. "She's stable for now," he explained to the nurses. "But every hour counts. Watch for fever, swelling, or sudden changes." His tone carried authority, but beneath it was a current of hope he rarely voiced. On the chair beside the bed, Emily's mother clutched her daughter's limp hand. Her tears had slowed, but her eyes remained swollen, her expression caught between relief and terror. "She looks so young," Mrs. Hart whispered, stroking Emily's bandaged arm. "She's always been so strong, but right now she looks like a child." Her husband, seated on the other side of the bed, placed a hand on her shoulder. "She's tougher than she looks. She wouldn't have made it through surgery otherwise." His words were meant to comfort, yet his jaw clenched as though he were convincing himself. Emily stirred faintly, her eyelids fluttering. Her mother leaned forward quickly. "Emily, can you hear me, sweetheart?" A groan escaped her lips. Weak but undeniable. Her lips moved, forming words too faint to understand. A nurse leaned close, lowering the oxygen mask slightly. "Easy, don't push yourself." Emily whispered something again, breathless. This time the nurse caught it. "The Marine." Her mother's face crumpled as she realized her daughter's first thought wasn't about herself, but about the soldier she had shielded. The nurse replaced the mask, nodding softly. "He's alive, Emily. You saved him." Her shoulders relaxed slightly, her hand twitching against her mother's. Then her eyes closed again, sleep pulling her back under. In the adjacent ward, Corporal James Miller refused to stay silent. Though his body was weak, his voice carried enough force to capture the attention of every visitor. "She didn't hesitate," he told a young private who stopped by. "I was done for, and she jumped in like she'd been trained for combat, took every blade meant for me." His words spilled into the hallways. Nurses repeated them to one another, amazed. Orderlies whispered them as they passed stretchers. Doctors who had stitched Emily's wounds shared their own awe at her resilience. Before long, the story spread beyond the hospital walls. In the mess hall, Marines spoke in reverent tones about the nurse who had bled for one of theirs. Some didn't believe it at first. 7 stab wounds? One scoffed, shaking his head. Nobody walks away from that. But others silenced him quickly. "She's alive," another said firmly. "And Corporal Miller swears she saved his life." By late afternoon, the tale had reached the base commander. Sitting behind his desk, Colonel Avery listened intently as his aide repeated the details. The colonel leaned back, rubbing his temples. "A civilian nurse took on a knife to save one of my men?" His voice carried disbelief, but not doubt. "That's the kind of courage you can't teach." He ordered a report to be filed immediately, noting Emily's actions. Though paperwork seemed inadequate compared to what she had endured, it was the first step toward official recognition. Inside the hospital, the atmosphere around Emily's room began to shift. Staff members paused at the doorway longer than necessary, casting glances filled with respect. Nurses who had once treated her as a colleague now regarded her as something more, someone who had crossed an invisible threshold into the ranks of those willing to bleed for another's life. Her parents noticed the change. Strangers nodded at them in the hallway, offering soft words of gratitude. A young Marine they had never met stopped them gently. "Your daughter saved a brother," he said, voice steady with emotion. "That means something to all of us." Mrs. Hart nearly broke down again, touched by the sincerity. Mr. Hart simply nodded, his throat too tight for words. That evening, Corporal Miller insisted on being wheeled to Emily's ward. Though still weak, he gripped the sides of his wheelchair with determination. "She needs to see me alive," he told the nurse, reluctantly pushing him. "She needs to know it wasn't for nothing." When he arrived outside her room, her parents allowed him in. He rolled close to her bedside, staring at her pale face and fragile form. "Hey," he whispered, voice trembling. "It's me. You saved me, Emily. I'm here because of you." His hand hovered uncertainly before gently resting on hers. "I'll never forget it. None of us will." She didn't wake, but her fingers twitched faintly under his touch. For Miller, it was enough. By nightfall, the hallway outside Emily's room had become a gathering place. Marines appeared in small numbers at first, men and women in fatigues, some carrying flowers, others simply standing quietly. They spoke in low voices, unwilling to disturb her, but their presence was unmistakable. A nurse passing by raised her eyebrows. "What's all this?" One Marine replied softly, "Just paying respect. She stood for one of ours." Word spread. Quickly, and more arrived. Soon the corridor was lined with Marines, their boots polished, their expressions solemn. They didn't enter without permission, but they didn't leave, To them, this was no ordinary civilian. Emily Hart had become family. Inside her room, her parents sat in stunned silence as the quiet procession unfolded outside. "She doesn't even know," Mrs. Hart whispered, shaking her head. "She doesn't know what she means to them." "She will," her husband replied firmly. "When she wakes, she see." Late into the night, Emily stirred again. Her eyes fluttered open, heavy and blurred. Through the haze, she caught sight of shadows beyond the glass window of her room. Shapes of men and women standing tall, some with caps in hand. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming, hallucinating. But as her vision cleared, she realized they were real. Marines, dozens of them. Her throat tightened, and a single tear slid down her cheek. She didn't understand why they were there, but deep inside, a warmth spread through her chest. She wasn't alone. She never would be again. The first rays of dawn crept through the narrow hospital window, soft and pale, cutting through the lingering shadows of the night. Emily stirred in her bed, her body aching in waves as consciousness returned in fragments. Every breath was shallow, weighted by the pressure of bandages binding her ribs. Her throat burned, her limbs heavy as lead. Yet, as her eyes cracked open, she noticed something unusual: silence. Not the sterile quiet of a hospital, but a charged stillness, as though the air itself held its breath. She turned her head slightly, grimacing at the pain. Beyond the glass pane of her door, she saw them again. Marines. Rows of uniforms lined the hallway, their figures tall and still, their faces solemn. They weren't talking, weren't fidgeting. They stood like sentinels, a silent guard posted, outside her room. At first, Emily thought she was imagining it. Painkillers and exhaustion often blurred reality. But when her mother noticed her stirring, she leaned forward, tears brimming. "They're here for you, sweetheart," she whispered, brushing Emily's hair back gently. Emily blinked, struggling to comprehend. For me? Her father, standing on the other side, nodded firmly. "They've been out there all night, waiting, watching. They say it's their way of showing respect." Before Emily could respond, a knock echoed softly against the door. The room tensed. Her parents exchanged nervous glances, then looked at her. With a faint nod, she granted silent permission. The door opened. 2 Marines stepped inside, dressed in immaculate blue uniforms, their posture rigid and dignified. Their polished shoes clicked softly against the floor as they approached the foot of her bed. Emily's breath caught in her throat, her chest tightening not from pain, but from disbelief. She had seen men in uniform countless times in the clinic, but never like this, never standing before her with such solemn reverence. The taller Marine stepped forward first. His face was stern, but his eyes carried warmth. In unison, both men raised their right hands to their brows in a sharp salute. Emily's eyes widened. A salute for her, Her heart pounded. She wasn't a soldier. She hadn't endured boot camp or battlefield fire. She was just a nurse who had acted on instinct. Yet here they stood, honoring her as though she were one of them. "Miss Hart," the taller Marine said, his voice steady and strong, "on behalf of the United States Marine Corps, we wish to thank you for your extraordinary courage. You protected one of our own with a bravery few possess. For that, you have our eternal respect." Her lips parted, but no words came. Tears welled, spilling down her cheeks unchecked. She wanted to tell them she didn't deserve this, that she had only done what anyone should have done. But her voice failed her. All she could manage was a faint shake of her head, her trembling hand clutching the blanket tighter. Her mother covered her mouth, sobbing softly, while her father straightened his shoulders, pride glistening in his eyes. The second Marine stepped forward then, placing a neatly folded American flag on the table beside her bed. "This is a symbol," he explained gently, "not of loss, but of honor. You stood between life and death. That kind of sacrifice deserves recognition." Emily stared at the flag, its crisp folds perfect, its meaning profound. Her tears fell faster. She had never expected recognition, never sought it. All she had wanted was to save a life. Yet the gesture carried weight, pressing deep into her heart. "Thank you," she managed finally, her voice hoarse and weak. "But I didn't do it for recognition. I just couldn't let him die." The taller Marine nodded. "That's exactly why it matters. You chose selflessness. You chose courage. That makes you one of us, whether you wear this uniform or not." For a long moment, silence hung in the room. Emily's tears slowed, replaced by a quiet strength. She had never felt smaller, yet somehow she had never felt stronger. Then the door opened again. One by one, more Marines entered. Not all in dress uniform, some in fatigues, some with bandaged arms or limping on crutches. They formed a line, waiting their turn to approach her. Each one saluted. Each one spoke words of gratitude. "Thank you, ma'am. You saved my brother. You're family now. You've shown us what courage looks like." They placed small tokens at her bedside, challenge coins, unit patches, handwritten notes. One left his personal medal, saying softly, "You've earned this more than I ever did." Emily's room filled with the quiet hum of voices, each one echoing the same sentiment: respect, gratitude, admiration. Her parents sat back in awe, watching as the Marines surrounded their daughter with the kind of honor they had only seen bestowed on decorated heroes. Emily's heart swelled. She felt the pain still coursing through her body, but beneath it was a warmth she couldn't describe. For the first time since the attack, she didn't feel broken. She felt whole. When Corporal Miller was wheeled in, silence fell. His face was pale, his body weak, but his eyes burned with determination. He rolled up to her bed and reached for her hand. "She saved me," he told the room, his voice hoarse but firm. "She's the reason I'm alive. I owe her my life." He turned to her then, squeezing her hand gently. "I'll never forget what you did. None of us will. You're one of us now, Emily. Always." Her tears returned, but this time they weren't of fear or pain. They were of belonging, of understanding, of realizing that in one night of terror, she had become part of something far greater than herself. The Marines filed out eventually, leaving her with tokens of their respect and the weight of their words. Her room was quiet again, but the silence no longer felt empty. It was filled with unseen bonds, threads of loyalty and gratitude that tied her to every Marine who had stood. Outside her door, Emily closed her eyes, exhausted, but for the first time, she slept peacefully, because she knew she was not alone. The days that followed blurred into a fragile rhythm of pain and healing. Emily's body fought stubbornly to mend itself, but each step of recovery was laced with agony. Breathing deeply pulled at her chest like barbed wire. Standing was impossible, without trembling knees and a nurse steadying her. Even lifting a cup of water felt like a battle. Yet for every weakness that threatened to drag her down, there was a constant strength at her side, the Marines. Every morning, she awoke to find at least 2 of them stationed outside her door. Some were strangers who had only heard her story. Others she began to recognize. Sergeant Daniels with his booming laugh, Private Lopez with shy eyes, Captain Harris, whose voice carried authority even when soft. They rotated like clockwork, always ensuring someone was there. "They don't have to do this," Emily whispered to her father one morning as he adjusted her blanket. Through the door's glass panel, she could see 2 Marines standing at attention, their posture unwavering. Her father gave her a quiet smile. "Maybe not, but they want to. That's the difference." The thought sank deep. She wasn't their comrade, wasn't bound by oath or uniform. Yet they had chosen her, just as she had chosen to shield one of them. Meals became lighter because she was never eating alone. When the doctors approved visitors, Marines filtered into her room in pairs, bringing trays of food and sometimes desserts smuggled from the mess hall. "Hospital pudding is a crime," Private Lopez declared one afternoon, sliding a slice of warm apple pie onto her tray. "Consider this contraband, but it's the good kind." Emily laughed softly, the sound rusty but genuine. The sweetness of the pie was nothing compared to the sweetness of being treated as more than a patient. Her mother noticed the difference. "You're smiling more," she said, brushing Emily's hair back gently. Emily nodded. "Because of them. They make me forget I'm broken." Her mother's eyes softened, though her voice carried a hint of sadness. "You're not broken, sweetheart. You're stronger than I've ever seen you." Evenings became story hours. Marines would pull up chairs around her bed, sharing tales of deployments, training mishaps, and camaraderie. Some stories made her laugh until her stitches ached, like when Sergeant Daniels described falling into a swamp during an exercise and emerging covered head to toe in mud, only to be saluted by mistake because no one recognized him. Other stories drew quiet respect, like Captain Harris recalling a mission where a split-second decision had saved his entire squad. Emily listened intently, her eyes wide, her heart swelling. She had always treated Marines as patients, men and women passing through her care. But now she saw them differently, not just soldiers, but brothers and sisters who carried each other through fire and fear. And now they carried her too. One afternoon, as she practiced standing with the help of a walker, her knees buckled suddenly. Before the nurse could catch her, 2 strong arms steadied her from behind. She looked up in surprise to find Corporal Miller, pale but determined, bracing her weight. "You're not falling on my watch," he said firmly, though his own body shook with the effort. Emily's lips trembled. "You shouldn't be out of bed. And you shouldn't be up on your feet yet," he countered with a grin. "Guess we're both stubborn." She laughed weakly, clinging to the walker. In that moment, surrounded by nurses and Marines, she realized something profound. They weren't protecting her out of pity. They were protecting her because she was now theirs. Word of her bravery continued to ripple outward. Local newspapers picked up the story. Headlines called her the nurse who took the blades. TV reporters requested interviews, though the hospital shielded her from the media storm. Still, Emily saw glimpses of it on the television in the common room. Her name spoken with reverence, her face displayed beside the American flag. It was overwhelming. "I don't deserve this attention," she murmured to her parents one evening as news anchors debated whether she should receive a civilian medal for valor. Her father squeezed her hand. "It's not about deserving, Emily. It's about truth. And the truth is, you stood in front of death and said no." people need. To hear that, her mother kissed her forehead. Let them be inspired. Let them see what courage looks like. Emily wasn't sure she agreed, but she couldn't ignore the fire it lit in others. Every Marine who visited seemed to carry that fire in their eyes. Her bond with them deepened in unexpected ways. Sergeant Daniels taught her how to play spades, insisting it was a survival skill in the course. Private Lopez confided about missing his younger sister back home, and Emily became a stand-in sister he never had near. Captain Harris, usually stoic, admitted late one evening that seeing her sacrifice reminded him why he wore the uniform. "You reminded us of what we fight for," he said, his voice low. "Not just each other, but the people who still believe in something greater than themselves." Emily blinked back tears, touched in ways words couldn't express. One night, as the Marines quietly stood guard, Emily asked her father to adjust her bed so she could see them clearly. Through the glass, their silhouettes were unmistakable. Two figures upright, still as statues, guarding her as if she were a general. Her chest tightened. She whispered softly, "Why me?" Her father leaned close, his voice gentle. "Because you became what they are, Emily. Someone who puts others first. You earned their loyalty." She let the words sink in. She had never asked for this, never dreamed of being connected to the military beyond her work. Yet here she was, bound to them by blood spilled in sacrifice. For the first time, Emily didn't question it. She accepted it. She was part of them now. As she drifted to sleep that night, the sound of boots shifting outside her door lulled her. The rhythm was steady, protective, almost like a lullaby of belonging. And for the first time since the attack, Emily didn't dream of knives or blood. She dreamed of flags, of salutes, of brothers and sisters in uniform standing shoulder to shoulder. She dreamed of family. The weeks after the attack unfolded like a slow march forward. Every day Emily regained something she thought she had lost. Her lungs learned to draw deeper breaths without searing pain. Her legs steadied after shaky steps with the walker, each stride a small victory. Stitches dissolved, scars began to knit, and the color returned faintly to her cheeks. But recovery wasn't just physical. There was an invisible strength forming inside her, one fueled by the Marines who never left her side. Morning after morning, she woke to the familiar sight of uniforms in the hall. No matter how tired or busy, they were always there. They rotated shifts, some offering a crisp salute as she practiced walking the corridor, others slipping her notes of encouragement, written in bold, unpolished handwriting. Each message carried the same theme: "You're one of us now." Emily's parents watched in awe. They had worried that the weight of the trauma would crush her spirit, but instead, they saw her growing taller under the invisible armor the Marines had placed on her shoulders. One evening, Colonel Avery himself visited. The hospital room hushed as he entered, his polished shoes echoing against the linoleum floor. Tall, broad, and commanding, he carried the aura of a man used to leading through storms. Yet as he approached Emily's bed, his expression softened. "Miss Hart," he said, his baritone voice respectful. "You've been under my watch without knowing it. I've read every report. I've heard every account. And I want to tell you, face to face, that what you did for Corporal Miller is the definition of valor." Emily fumbled for words, flustered. I was just doing my job." The colonel shook his head firmly. "No, a job requires skill and duty. What you did was instinct born of courage. You placed yourself between danger and another human being without hesitation. That's not a job. That's heroism." Her cheeks flushed. She lowered her gaze, unable to meet the weight of his praise. But the colonel wasn't finished. He reached into his pocket, retrieving a small velvet box. Opening it revealed a bronze medal glinting under the fluorescent lights. "This," he said, holding it with reverence, is the Navy and Marine Corps Medal. It is the highest non-combat decoration awarded for heroism. And it's yours, Miss Hart. Gasps filled the room. Emily's mother pressed a hand to her, lips, tears streaming freely, while her father straightened with pride. Emily's breath caught. I don't know what to say. Colonel Avery placed the medal gently in her palm. Say nothing. Just know that you've become part of our history now. Your name will stand beside Marines who acted with the same courage. You may not wear the uniform, but in spirit, you already do. Her fingers closed around the medal, trembling. For the first time, the truth sank deep. Her actions had not been a fleeting moment of instinct. They had become part of something larger than herself. The announcement spread like wildfire. Newspapers headlined, "Civilian Nurse Receives Navy and Marine Corps Medal for Heroism." Television anchors replayed her story, showing images of Emily pale but smiling, holding the medal against her hospital gown. Letters poured in from strangers across the country, veterans, families of soldiers, young nurses, inspired by her courage. Emily tried to read them all, though each letter brought fresh tears. Some thanked her for saving a Marine. Others thanked her for reminding them that bravery still existed outside the battlefield. Many simply called her sister. The Marines noticed too. "You're famous now," Sergeant Daniels teased one afternoon, setting a newspaper on her tray. Emily groaned. "Don't remind me." But even as she said it, her eyes lingered on the headline, and a flicker of pride stirred in her chest. Preparations soon began for a formal ceremony at the base. Though still weak, Emily agreed to attend. She felt nervous, unworthy of the spotlight, but the Marines insisted. "This isn't about attention," Captain Harris assured her. "It's about acknowledgement. You deserve to stand in front of the flag and be recognized." The day arrived under a clear sky. Emily was wheeled onto the parade ground, her parents at her side, Marines flanking her chair like an honor guard. Rows upon rows of Marines stood at attention, their uniforms pristine, their boots gleaming. A sight stole her breath. Colonel Avery stepped to the podium, his voice carrying across the assembly. "Today, we honor a woman who embodies the very essence of courage. Emily Hart is not a Marine by training, yet she acted with a Marine's heart. She shielded one of ours, enduring 7 stab wounds without faltering. She risked everything so another could live." The crowd stood still, hanging on every word. "She has proven," Avery continued, "that courage is not limited by uniform, rank, or title. It is a choice made in a heartbeat to protect another. Today, we make it official. Emily Hart is family." He stepped aside as the band struck up a solemn march. A young Marine carried forward a framed certificate, followed by another holding the medal's ribbon, freshly polished. Emily was lifted gently from her chair by 2 Marines who supported her on either side. Though her legs trembled, she stood tall, her chin raised. Her heart pounded as Colonel Avery draped the ribbon around her neck, the medal resting just above her chest. The colonel saluted her, and then, in perfect unison, every Marine on the field snapped to attention and returned the salute. The sound of boots striking the ground thundered like a heartbeat. The air vibrated with loyalty, respect, and honor. Emily's vision blurred with tears. She raised her trembling hand in return, completing the gesture she had never thought she'd make. For a moment, she wasn't just a nurse. She was one of them. After the ceremony, Marines swarmed around her, offering congratulations, shaking her hand, and calling her sister. Children of service members hugged her legs. Mothers thanked her. Even grizzled veterans approached with watery eyes, saluting her with shaky hands. Emily felt overwhelmed, but she also felt whole. Her scars were still fresh, her body still weak, but her spirit had never been stronger. That night, back in her hospital room, She placed the medal on the table beside her bed. It gleamed softly in the lamplight, a quiet reminder of everything she had endured and everything she had gained. She traced her fingers over the ribbon, whispering softly to herself, "I'm not alone anymore." And for the first time, she believed it fully. The transition from hospital bed to her own home felt surreal. Emily Hart had spent weeks surrounded by the sterile hum of machines, the quiet vigilance of Marines, and the constant presence of medical staff. Now her room smelled of familiar furniture, soft blankets, and home-cooked meals, yet it also carried the eerie quiet of a life that had once seemed ordinary. Her parents fussed over her, unpacking a small bag, fluffing pillows, and checking every corner for comfort. Yet, Emily's eyes were drawn elsewhere. She glanced at the empty hallway outside, half expecting to see the familiar silhouettes of Marines standing at attention. Their absence left her uneasy. She had grown accustomed to their presence, their steadying force like an invisible shield, surrounding her. "Mom, Dad," she whispered, voice still fragile, I don't know, incomplete without them here." Her mother smiled gently, brushing Emily's hair from her forehead. "You're home now. They'll visit. There. Not gone. You've become family to them, Emily. That bond doesn't vanish." Her father nodded, a faint grin breaking his otherwise serious face. "You've been adopted in every sense that counts. And they'll remind you of it every chance they get." Emily let out a weak laugh, tears glinting in her eyes. She had survived 7 knife wounds. She had faced death without flinching. And now, even in her own home, the enormity of her journey was just beginning to settle. Within days, the visits began. First, it was Corporal Miller, arriving with a bouquet of flowers and a shy smile. He held her hand gently, his own body still recovering, and said softly, "I visit a lot, don't I?" Emily smiled, the warmth in her chest blooming. "Not nearly enough. I owe you my life." He shook his head. "No, you saved me. That's enough. But consider this. Every time you smile or laugh, you remind me that courage can survive even when everything else fails." Then came Sergeant Daniels and Private Lopez, dragging a small cake decorated with a crude but heartfelt icing message. "Welcome home, hero." Emily laughed aloud at the sight, feeling tears prick her eyes. "It's hospital safe, we promise," Daniel said, grinning. "And we may have stolen some frosting from the mess hall." Emily shook her head, marveling at how natural it felt to be surrounded by them. She had always been the caregiver, the one tending to wounds and fears. Now she was the cared for, protected, and celebrated. Weeks turned into months. Emily's body healed steadily, though scars remained as reminders of that fateful night. But even more profound was the emotional transformation. She was no longer just a civilian nurse. She was a member of the Marine family, a symbol of courage and selflessness. The Marines continued to visit. Some brought news from the base, sharing stories of training exercises or deployments. Others simply came to sit quietly by her side, sharing coffee, laughter, and companionship. Emily's parents marveled at the loyalty of strangers who had become family. "You've changed their lives," her mother said one afternoon as Emily sipped tea, surrounded by 3 visiting Marines. "And they've changed yours." Emily nodded. She could feel it. Every story, every visit, every salute had left an imprint on her heart. Her life was no longer hers alone. It was intertwined with theirs in ways she was only beginning to comprehend. The Navy and Marine Corps medal sat proudly on a shelf in her living room, catching the sunlight each morning. It was more than a symbol of survival. It was a testament to the bond she had forged with the Marines, to the life she had chosen to protect another human being. Every time she looked at it, she remembered the fear, the pain, and the impossible courage she had summoned. Letters and photos from Marines began to arrive at her home regularly. Some were simple thank yous. Others were more elaborate, recounting memories of her bravery or sharing personal victories inspired by her actions. One framed photo arrived, showing a Marine squad at sunrise, saluting in unison with a note, "Your courage lives in us every day." Emily placed the photo beside the medal. Her chest swelled with emotion. She had survived, yes, but more importantly, she had become part of something eternal, a legacy of courage, sacrifice, and loyalty. Months later, the base invited Emily to attend a formal Marine Corps ceremony in her honor. She arrived in simple civilian clothes, escorted by her parents. The base was alive with disciplined energy, flags waving, boots clicking in rhythm across the parade ground. As she stepped forward, her chest tightened, not from fear, but from awe. She was home, in a sense she had never imagined. Colonel Avery greeted her with a salute. "Welcome back, Emily. You are a hero not only by action, but by heart." Every Marine present returned the salute, some with tears in their eyes. Emily's gaze swept across the rows of faces, the men and women who had become her family. She felt their strength, their pride, and their unspoken bond. She was not alone. She never would be. The ceremony concluded with applause, but Emily didn't hear it in the way an audience might. She felt it deep in her chest, as though every heartbeat carried the echoes of that night. The terror, the bravery, the bond formed in fire and blood. At home that evening, surrounded by her parents and a few visiting Marines, Emily finally allowed herself to reflect. She thought of the Marine she had shielded, the attacker she had faced, the life she had chosen to protect at all costs. She thought of the medal, the visits, the bond that would last forever. And she realized, with a quiet smile, that the world would never view her the same way again, nor would she view herself the same. Her parents watched her closely. "You've been through so much," her mother said gently. "How are you feeling?" Emily looked around the room at the familiar faces of her adopted family, the letters and tokens of respect, and the medal gleaming on the shelf. "I'm alive," she said softly, "and I'm not alone. I've been given something I never expected, a family that will always be with me. And maybe that's enough." Her father smiled, tears glinting. "It's more than enough." Years later, Emily would often think back to that night, the fear, the pain, and the choice to act despite everything. She would tell her story at nursing conferences, in interviews, and quietly to friends who never knew the full depth of her bravery. Yet no story carried the weight of the truth she felt in her chest, that she was now part of something larger than herself. The Marines continued to visit, even as her life returned to a semblance of normalcy. Some came for birthdays, others for holidays, and some simply for the comfort of shared history. Emily welcomed them all, each visit a reminder that courage, loyalty, and family were not always defined by blood or rank. Her scars faded, but the bonds did not. Her bravery had survived the night, but it had also become a living legacy, etched not only on her body, but in the hearts of every Marine who knew her story. Emily Hart had faced death, embraced life, and found a family she never expected. And in the quiet moments, when she held her medal close, she understood that heroism was not about glory. It was about choice, courage, and the unwavering commitment to stand between danger and another human being, no matter the cost. And in that understanding, she found peace.